Hello and welcome to Projector, and on this episode, Mary J. Blige investigates the mysterious death of her fellow cops in the horror thriller Body Cam.
Returning to the force after a suspension, Officer Renee Lamito Smith, played by Mary J. Blige, is partnered with young rookie cop Danny Hollidge, played by Nat Wolff. Lamito and Hollidge discover Lamito's former partner Kevin Ganning, played by Ian Castleberry, has been killed in mysterious circumstances, and Lamito is the only witness to the dashcam footage of his death. As they pursue main suspect Tanisha Brands, played by Anika and Noni Rose, other cops start being attacked by a supernatural force that only allows Lamito to view footage of the events.
Alright, this is going to be a very different kind of Projector video because you see I'm trying to release this very quickly. I wasn't even aware this film was coming out. Apparently Paramount only announced its release just 6 days ago, and now it's popped up on UK VOD services a day ahead of its American debut. So literally I'm turning this around at the very, very last minute. I just watched it this afternoon, and now this evening I'm filming the review. Body Cam is the latest film to come out of the Paramount Players sub-label, which largely focuses on genre and niche fare, and it definitely feels like Paramount is using the current COVID-19 crisis as a way of quietly shuttling out a film they weren't especially happy with. This wouldn't be the first time that Paramount has done this to one of the Players' films, although usually what they do with them is they just sell them off to Netflix. You might recall last year the movie Eli, which premiered on there. That was also another Paramount production that was meant to have a theatrical release, and then they sold it off to Netflix. I'd imagine, under any other circumstance, that probably would have been what had happened to Body Cam. But since, we have a captive audience at home hungry for any kind of new content, regardless of the quality, that's how Body Cam managed to remain with Paramount, but given an extremely quiet release. Certainly it took me by surprise to see a brand new movie come Monday morning. Body Cam is directed by Malik Vittal. This is his second feature after the Netflix John Boyega drama Imperial Dreams, and the script is co-written by Nicholas McCarthy, who is best known for his horror credits that include The Pact and last year's The Prodigy. What is quite interesting is that I did find an article reporting on Mary J. Blige's casting, which mentions that McCarthy was working on his rewrite with John Ridley, who is best known for co-writing 12 Years a Slave, which is an extremely prestigious credit to have that appears nowhere on the final version of the film, suggesting that either Ridley didn't contribute very much, or he wanted his name taken off of this film, which is perfectly understandable. I wouldn't say Body Cam is completely terrible, but it definitely looks and smells like a dump movie in every sense of the phrase. This is definitely a film that Paramount doesn't really want you to know about all that much. If there's something to be said about Body Cam, it's this extremely ripped from the headlines. Certainly in the last few years we've seen numerous tragic stories of cops using excessive, often fatal force against unarmed minorities, which has led those communities to a distrust and suspicion of the police in general. And you can see this represented a lot in recent black cinema, likes of The Hate U Give or Queen and Slim, but perhaps the movie that Body Cam most reminds me of is last year's Black and Blue, and not just because both of them feature body cams as key plot points, but both films in some way deal with a main character who is black, dealing with the fact that they are also a police officer and what that means, being part of that establishment that also has elements of corruption in it that attacks other people of colour. And certainly I think that both films try to grapple with that idea in a sort of mainstream way. In Black and Blue's case, it tries to do it as a mainstream action film, whereas in Body Cam's case, it presents it as a horror film. And in that way, Body Cam does try to tap into something, especially in the way that the genre most recently has reawakened its social conscience, which is perhaps why recent horror films have been so great. Again, that fear informs films like Get Out. I think that in the right hands, you could create an allegory that could be a worthy commentary of this subject. Body Cam isn't that movie. I do have to admit, I went into this with absolutely no expectations because I knew nothing about it, so I did find myself faintly pleasantly surprised at first because it did feel a little bit original. It's very rare that you see a combination of the cop genre and the horror genre at the same time, not like this, and I didn't quite know where it was leading me at first. And I think that it's not especially badly directed. I think that when it comes to handling the cop side of it, it's much more formulaic, but the horror stuff is especially effectively done. There isn't a lot of horror set pieces here, but I do think that Bodycam gets those right. It certainly earns its R rating. The gore in this is really quite vicious and nasty at times. There are some absolutely brutal kills in here, but there is genuine suspense. I think perhaps the best moment where the genres converge is when they're going through an abandoned house, and they definitely mine that sequence for as much tension as possible. Even in a regular cop drama, there's a lot of suspense mined from that kind of sequence, so you can see how it would naturally adapt itself to horror, even if there is a fairly cringeworthy moment where a drawer is pulled out and it has CGI cockroaches, which is a fairly risible jump scare, and the scene also concludes with a big boo moment that I'm pretty sure is taken from one of the Conjuring films. Likewise, there's a later sequence in a convenience store that starts out as a bit of petty thievery that then turns into a hold-up and then turns into an absolute bloodbath. I think that sequence definitely shows how the two genres could intersect in meaningful, surprising, and actually quite effective ways. I think that convenience store part is perhaps the film's high point. It certainly never tops it in terms of managing to get the two genres on proper speaking terms with each other and actually feeling like it fits within the two of them. I think that the movie does do at least a couple of sequences fairly well, so it's not a complete loss. Unfortunately, there's a lot of problems that mostly come down to the script. Everything in the movie is underdeveloped. Take Lamito as a character, for example. The first time we meet her, she's being put back on the police force after an extended suspension for punching someone in the face, which was caught on body cam, which became a public scandal. And that immediately puts you in mind of things like police brutality, abuse of power, and the human fallibility of the police force. But then the movie doesn't really know what to do with this idea. It certainly doesn't seem very comfortable with the shade of grey that it adds to our hero, so for the most part, it just completely forgets about it, which makes it so much more frustrating because it's so prominent in the early stages of the film. The other characters mock her for it, talk about it, and it just leads nowhere. The character explains it as being a momentary lapse of judgment brought on by grief and stress and provocation by a racist, but the weird thing about it is that considering it was a viral video, we never actually see it during the course of the film to make our own mind up about it. We just have to take her word for it, which does feel a little bit queasy. Maybe they were aiming for some kind of ambiguity there, but it just feels like a plot strand that just was left completely hanging. That grief, by the way, is for the loss of her son, who drowned in an accident, but the only reason they've given her that character trait is to give her some link to the woman that she's pursuing, while simultaneously giving an easy avenue to the filmmakers to add a bunch of lazy dream sequences when they run out of horror material. It isn't helped by Mary J. Blige's performance, which is surprisingly flat. Blige has shown in the past that she is a very capable actor. She was recently nominated for an Oscar for her role in the movie Mudbound, but in this movie, she's a complete blank. Her face is emotionless most of the time, even when she's confronted with abject supernatural things. For example, when she watches the dashcam footage early on, and she sees her former partner flung into the air by an invisible force, and then lands on the bonnet, all bloodied, and then dragged up again by that same force. No response whatsoever on her face. Nothing. No shock, no surprise, nothing. Just watches it completely calmly the entire time. And this is what happens throughout the entirety of the movie. She just completely just straightforwardly plods through it. And it's very, very odd. You'd watch this and you think that she was a terrible actor. It seems very clear that she wasn't very well directed if this was what she turned in. And again, it really hurts the movie because it feels like it should have a very emotive performance at the centre of it to anchor it, and it just simply isn't there, unfortunately. Nat Wolff is similarly undercharacterised as a rookie partner, given absolutely nothing to rise above the standard archetype, and a lot of the time, it just seems like he's there for someone to have Blige to talk to, and they don't even have that good a chemistry together. A lot of the reason why something like End of Watch works is because of that great dynamic between Jake Gyllenhaal and Michael Pena. It makes you care about those characters. Otherwise, it's just two actors in a police car making small talk with each other, and that's precisely what ends up happening here. And Wolff's performance only looks worse after a major reveal is attached to his character that is in no way implied by his performance up until that point. It's only right before the scenes, before that key moment, does it start to emerge, and it seems like something that would have informed his characterization throughout the entirety of the movie. You could have done something really subtle there, and instead, Wolff just goes through the motions. He feels more like a kid than a police officer a lot of the time. As for Anika Noni Rose, she barely even has a character at all. She's essentially more of a MacGuffin than an actual person, and her characterization is so scattershot that it frankly makes very little sense. What really undoes Body Cam, though, is that it manages to fall into the traps of both the genres that it's playing in. It manages to be both simultaneously a plodding horror film and a deeply boring police procedural at the same time. This is especially true in the second half, where it really focuses on the mystery element as the characters try to figure out what's going on and what's behind the supernatural element, which is largely investigative. In fact, there are great chunks of this horror film where it forgets it's supposed to be a horror movie. There's no attempt to add any kind of sinister atmosphere or anything like that. It just feels like a routine cop drama with a couple of jump scares in it, unfortunately. And that mystery is not very compelling. The main problem is that the audience is way ahead of the characters the entire time. We're already familiar with the subject matter, and also, if we've seen a cop drama in the last 25 years, yeah, we know exactly where this is heading. But no, the movie drags this out ever so slowly for much of its running time, even though it very heavily implies it right from the outset. The movie begins with a cold open that pretty much tells us all we need to know, but it's literally 15 minutes from the end of the movie before it finally lets us in on what we probably already assumed. It's really frustrating, and it really delays the movie taking advantage of its subject matter, and by the time it does properly interact with it, it's too late to do anything about it. So little is actually accomplished over the course of the film, and it just ends up being a tired collection of tropes from both of these genres, except I haven't had the novelty of seeing them together at the same time, which is a real shame given the originality that it seemingly had at its very start. And worse, it feels like it seems to go out of its way to try and downplay its political and social subtext that it was initially trying to interact with. Certainly, there's less of a race-based element to what's actually going on, which might be surprising considering the real-life inspiration for its plot. By the time that it finally remembers it's supposed to be a horror film in time for the finale, it gets deeply silly. It gets very, very sentimental in one very cheesy final image towards the end of the film, and it just feels like they really missed a major opportunity here. Is Body Cam completely awful? No, but it is deeply dull. This is a real squandering of a potentially interesting idea executed in the most rote, disinterested manner possible. There are a couple of moments that show what it could have been had it been handled correctly. Some of the set pieces are well done, and I think for horror fans, they might get a kick out of some of the gorier kills in this. Otherwise, I don't think them or crime fans are going to be particularly satisfied by this. This was certainly never going to be a theatrical release. VOD was always going to be this movie's home because it looks cheap, it's very uneventful, and who's going to see this on the big screen? And even as a rental, it feels like a time waster. It feels like the kind of thing you'd watch on a slow night because you have nothing else to do. I think for horror fans who are absolute diehards, yeah, you might want to check this out. Otherwise, steer clear. If you like this review, then your next assignment is to go over to my Patreon, where you can see my reviews early among other perks, including access to my Discord server. But until next time, I'm Matthew Buck, fading out.